Well, welcome back to the final stage. On the second stage, got a bit cut off a bit early. You just missed really, and sorry about that, but you just missed probably a couple of branches there and the gate opening with the fencing. But basically, that's about all I've done to it. We've got to this final stage now, and it is purely a matter of putting on the shadow work, and shadow work is one of the most important things in any painting really. I mean, not only landscape but anything. Some of the shadow work, obviously the light, medium and dark shadows for the trees and hedging, and to a certain extent the field are already there, or the greenery on the edge of the field. But now it's just a matter of really making it look sunlit on the landscape. Not going to have much in the way of no shadows really in the distance, because there's nothing in the field. So my shadow mix, well, there's varying mixes for that, but my favourite shadow mix is ultramarine and a red. It could be alizarin crimson, but because I've used the cadmium red this time, I'm going to use cadmium red, or vermilion. That's also good. Any of those reds really, you get a slightly different tone, but we're looking for a purpley blue colour. Now I could demonstrate, there's two methods of shadow work. One would be just mixing the shadow colour and swiping across the complete landscape, the green, the track and the field, in one sort of purpley blue. Or you could mix up a dark green and put the greens in, and then fill in the areas with a purpley blue. So let's do it that way. Let's start off with the dark green and pick up, because that's not a bad method on this sort of landscape. Right, now for the dark green, remember the mix for that? Prussian blue, cadmium yellow and a small amount of burnt sienna. And that gives us, try and make it a little more blue, so plenty of blue in the mix. That makes it the green dark. And we've got, and don't remember the contour, it comes down the bank like that. Now that's the dark shadow down the bank. It would get, it's, you know, if the sun was a little bit lower, you would see it go over the top of that centre region. Probably that one you may not see come up this side. You could add a little bit there just to hint at something's the end of that. But then, to denote a gap between the two, I'm leaving a gap and I'm coming down the bank again, like that. Load the brush. You've got to keep loading the brush all the time. And now this will be across there, and then of course up the track the other side, or the bank of the track, so you can see the contour, the way it lays, and that is very, very important. And then I'm going to leave another small gap as the shadow comes down across this area. It's virtually there really, the shadow in that respect, because we did put it in earlier on, and this is going to be, not going to shadow it completely. Nice to leave some little touches where there's possibly a little bit of light coming through the greenery. Okay, so that's that shadow. Now to connect that up, I need that purpley blue, and all I'm going to do, ultramarine, mix up a reasonable mix for this, because I want to bring a bit across the field, maybe a cloud shadow or a shadow cast by a cloud in the distance. I'll show you how to do that shortly. But to start with, let's do the shadow on the track and, you know, the immediate shadows. And I'm going to use the red that I used, the vermilion or cadmium red, and I've got a nice purpley blue. May make it a little warmer So more blue in the distance, which is this area. So that is that shadow coming across there, and it will also just break out into that area there. And then, so really you just link up the shadows that you've just put on, really. You know, that's the very simple way of producing a shadow. And then there's this one here. Can leave one or two gaps here and there. You've got to remember, particularly the top of the trees would have a little bit more of a gap because they're not as dense. To appreciate this, you need to allow it to dry, obviously. Once it completely dries, so you've linked it all together, right? And then, of course, there's the tree itself. Well, we started that, but I'm going to continue that. I'm actually bringing the back of the tree in as well. And of course, there would be some overhangings from the overhanging branches. Now, a lot of people put in a shadow that almost looks like the tree itself. Well, you wouldn't get that. All you would really see was a very, what they call foreshortened image of that landscape. These would be a bit wider here because you're nearer, you're looking down onto them. And then, of course, finally I'm going to put that lovely shadow a little weaker across, that may very well come across there, and a little bit across this landscape. Now that quite likely would be a cloud shadow, and with another brush I'm just softening the edges just to give a nice soft feel, because if it's a cloud shadow, more often than not it would have soft edges. And then finally, I'm going to use a small brush for this. I'm going to pick up some dark brown. I've got a bit there in the mix, greeny brown, nice strong mix, to create what I call crop markings or whatever from the, and these will pull the eye in at the right perspective. They won't all just stand up. You've got tapering, so really the vanishing point is somewhere there, so they all, or possibly there, so they all need to head towards that vanishing point. And what you do, you had smaller marks in the distance like that, but as you come forward the marks get larger, narrow there, and they are purely crop markings that give perspective to that field. I would recommend this on most landscapes, and then you've got one like that, you may just see another one like that. And that's pretty much it, really. I suppose the odd bird or two, you know, some people say it gets a bit sort of twee, but I think the odd dark bird probably would be nice. Dark blue colour, brown with it just to warm it up. There we go. And rooks, crows, you know, you could have them going across the sky, but I'm going to have them just flying around the top of the tree as they do. These lovely rooks or crows, whatever they are, and possibly have a couple flying off. See the way I do them? Up for the right wing, across and down for the left wing. And one more in the distance, somewhere about there. And all we need to do, as everyone should do, including yourselves, whenever you paint a picture, always sign it, because it's so important that future reference. I'm going to sign it with the paint I used in the picture. You can sign it in pencil, or you can also sign it in permanent ink, but I wouldn't use a ballpoint because it's not permanent. And that is more or less it. Okay, just before I go through the explaining of it, I just want to show you what the reason why I've just put a small piece of tape around the outside, purely because it more or less it's what I call frames the picture. I learnt to do this when I was demonstrating, because it does make a big difference to the look of it. When you're tearing this off, tear away from the picture, because if there are any damp areas, it would come back in and tear the picture itself. And that is quite a simple but very effective way of painting a lovely simple landscape. And I'm sure that most of you would like to have a try at that, and just quickly run through. We damped the sky as far down as the edge of the field over the distant trees. Then I dropped in this lovely warm yellowy red, orangey colour. While everything's still wet, I then got ultramarine, a little bit of red in there, not much, lighter around the tree and to the right, and smaller brush strokes and lighter into the distance, leaving white plus some of that lovely warm tone. And if you notice how it's all soft, there's no hard edges. Once it dries, you'll get hard edges, which I like at the softer edges. And then we put an overall wash on the landscape. Then we came back and did the distance, quite bluey grey, sets that well back. Then we did the trees and the hedging and the border to the track and the field. Obviously putting in the trees, small amount of branches, didn't want to overdo that. You can always add another one or two the next day if you look and think perhaps it could do with another one, but if you overdo it, then you can't, it's more difficult to take them out. Got a nice bit of sunlight coming from the left, it's actually denoted by those shadows on the track, and then we've got clouds in the sky, so it may be there's a cloud shadow just swooping across the landscape. That's why it's got soft edges. Immediate things that are shadowed would have hard edges. If you get very distant shadow like clouds or trees well into the distance, they could end up with soft edges. Certainly cloud shadows would. And then I put in this crop marking to give perspective, so the eye is pulled towards the area of distance, somewhere about there. It's the sort of scene that you think, wonder what's around the corner, wonder what's in that field. And that's the sort of impression that you need to consider achieving, really. Okay, a little bit on brush care. At the end, clean the brushes thoroughly in fresh water. I'm only doing it in there, but clean it in fresh water. Dry the brushes on tissue and dry them straight, and then lay them like that and make certain you've got the brush hairs straight, because if they happen to be at an angle, they will unfortunately dry out of shape. You can get them back by damping and re-drying them, but far better if you just dry them nice and straight, leave them all there to dry, and leave the paper there to dry as well. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that, and next time on this How to Paint series, I'm going to look at painting buildings, because that's another area of landscape painting that is very, very important. Thank you for watching.